All right, welcome to Hoops Tonight here at The Volume. Happy Monday, everybody. Hope all of you guys had a great weekend. Got a jam-packed show for you today. We're doing our first edition of Power Rankings today as we rank the top 10 teams in the league and dig a little bit into each one of those teams. And then at the tail end of the show, I got a mailbag. We're going to hit a couple of different teams that were not in the Power Rankings this week. You guys know the drill. Before we get started, subscribe to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel so you don't miss any more of our videos. Follow me on Twitter at @JasonLT so you guys don't miss show announcements. Don't forget about our podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts, under Hoops Tonight. Also, we're running a couple of new Hoops Tonight social media feeds on Twitter, on Instagram, and on Facebook. So make sure you guys follow there where we release more content. And then last but not least, keep dropping mailbag questions in those YouTube comments so we can keep hitting them throughout the remainder of the season. All right, let's talk some basketball. So with Power Rankings, I think it's very important every time I do a list to kind of lay out criteria for you guys. I intend to use our weekly Monday Power Rankings as an opportunity to talk about who's been playing well as of late, okay? So this is not our contenders list. The contenders list, it would take a lot of information for me to change how I feel about a team. For instance, like most of the teams have only played between 5 and 7 games. For the most part, every team, if you cherry pick a specific stretch of the season, you can find a 5 or 7 game stretch where they look awesome, and you can find a 5 to 7 game stretch where they look like shit, right? Like that's kind of part of the deal. Now, I will say at the beginning of the season in particular, I'm a little more tuned in because this is when everyone's playing hard. No one's bored in October, right? Like you don't get bored until later into the season. So there's a little bit more to learn now, but I'm never going to overreact to any 5 or 7 game sample to change my contender rankings. Those are large sample size types of changes. We'll check in on our contender rankings periodically throughout the season, especially when something changes, right? But I want Power Rankings to be an opportunity for us to shine a light on teams that are playing well as of late. So obviously this first edition is going to cover the entire season, but as we get deeper into the season, the Power Rankings are going to kind of focus more on who's playing well in the last like week or two. It'll be like the entire season, but an extra emphasis on the last week or two. So that just gives you a little an idea of how I'm going to structure those power rankings. So if we're like a couple months into it and there's like a team that's like 500, but they go 5-1 over a 2-week span and have a bunch of impressive wins, even though I might not necessarily think they're one of the 10 best teams in the league, they might crack into the top 10 of our power rankings so that we have an opportunity to shout them out. Hopefully that makes some sense. One other note on this week's rankings, 7 of my 10 teams ended up being from the Western Conference. The gap between the East and the West is apparent right away to start this year. The West has 11 teams that are 500 or better. The East has 5 teams that are 500 or better. Now, that should level out a little bit, but also the West is 50-43 head-to-head against the Eastern Conference, which is actually an even higher win percentage cross-conference than they had last year so far. So only 3 Eastern Conference teams made the power rankings this week. However, there's one team in particular, the Bucks, that I wanted to touch briefly on today that will hit in the mailbag. All right, without any further ado, let's get to the rankings. Number 10, the Houston Rockets. They're off to a 3-3 start, but they've had some impressive wins. They blew out a full-strength Grizzlies squad. They went into Dallas and controlled the game from wire to wire. Dallas never took a lead in that game. Dallas did an incredible job defending Luka and Kyrie in that game, just making things difficult. They still got the numbers, but they didn't overhelp. They kept them playing a lot of iso ball. Dallas only generated 8 wide-open threes in the entire game per NBA.com, and that's well down from what you expect from that Dallas offense. They forced them into a bunch of tough contested jumpers. Ball pressure is the strength of this Houston Rockets team. I've talked a lot about this concept in the early part of the season, but I find ball pressure to be one of the most underappreciated traits of a good basketball player and an underappreciated ability that a team has to change the pace of basketball games. Get up into the ball handler's jersey, make it so that it's difficult for him to get across half court, pressure off the ball too, fighting guys off of spots. Think of it like this. A team runs a horn set. They're used to everyone, getting to where they want to get to, the ball handler getting to the middle of the floor, whatever that cross screen that you're running around the elbows before you flow into whatever action you're running out of horns. If you can disrupt that by pressuring the ball and fighting guys off a spot so that if he catches at the high post, instead of catching at the elbow, he catches extended out or in a different spot. You blow up a screening action with physical pressure. You do that kind of stuff, it gets the other team out of their offense. It makes them uncomfortable. It makes them play a way that they don't want to play. And so I am always going to be kind of keeping an eye out for teams that can really pressure the ball. And like Houston can really pressure the ball. The Warriors game. They had a game against the Warriors over the weekend that the Warriors won in overtime, where the Warriors took a big lead early and the Rockets crawled all the way back, actually took a brief lead in the fourth quarter and ended up sending the game to overtime. But in large part because of their ball pressure. They were picking up full court, causing issues. Tari Eason at one point had like back-to-back pick sixes, and he's like literally on his back, hyperventilating on the ground after getting the second one while they're playing 5-on-4 the other way, because they're just playing so hard and they're so young and they're so athletic, and they leverage that to make the games kind of messy, right? Like their offense can bog down from time to time. We know that they're kind of inconsistent shooting the ball, but they make you uncomfortable and they can make these games messy. And that is where they can find opportunities to get wins. Their metrics right now, they're 11th in offense, 11th in defense, 9th in net rating. Second in offensive rebounding, kind of an intriguing stat for them. 11th in overall rebounding. Jalen Green is off to an intriguing start. He's taking 10 threes a game and hitting 39% of them. In the Dallas game, Luka hits a step back three, cuts it to 3, and Jalen Green ends up hitting a massive step back 3, like kind of off the dribble combination 3 on the left wing that ices that game. 3-point shooting is exciting from him early, and it still feels like they have some room to improve on the offensive end. Like Fred VanVleet doesn't really have it going. Şengün post up is a big part of their offense that hasn't really started clicking yet. That will ultimately determine whether or not they can make any noise, like actually get a real playoff spot in the stacked Western Conference. But really, really like what I'm seeing in terms of their ball pressure on the perimeter right now. Number 9, the Memphis Grizzlies. They're off to a 4-3 start. Their 2 losses, they had 2 ugly losses in there to the Bulls and Nets, but it was kind of weird if you look at the context. Like Ja Morant misses the Bulls game. Marcus Smart and Desmond Bane both get hurt early in the Nets game. They have a couple of really impressive wins surrounding that. That's why I'm kind of looking at them as a team that's a little better than their record. They blew out a full-strength Orlando Magic team. They beat the shit out of the Bucks without Desmond Bane or Marcus Smart on the floor. Just ran them off the floor in transition all day long in that game. They also defended Dame really well in that game. Shout out to Scottie Pippen Jr., who's been an exciting kind of piece that's popping for them this year. Then they went into Philly and blew out the Sixers, albeit without Joel Embiid and Paul George. Their metrics right now, they're 8th in offense, 14th in defense, 10th in net rating, 5th in rebounding. The injuries to Bane and Marcus Smart especially are like discouraging, just because they're such an important part of what makes this team tick on both ends of the floor. Obviously, Desmond Bane, who can really run action off the ball next to Ja, but also take over the offense when Ja is off the floor. Marcus Smart is this important connective piece. He gives them another way to get the defense in rotation by posting up. He's both Bane and Smart, in my opinion, are 2 really good physical perimeter defenders. So, and it's just discouraging because Marcus Smart just hasn't been able to stay on the floor for this team. And I kind of just want to see what it looks like in a larger sample. But this team is really deep and they have a lot of guys that are stepping up. The rookie Jalen Wells has popped right away as a guy who can provide aggressive off-ball scoring, which is super valuable with Ja Morant. Like, just doesn't need a ton of space and is super aggressive in catch and shoot situations, which kind of makes him a useful off-ball offensive player. Santi Aldama is hooping. Career highs in scoring volume and efficiency. He's got great chemistry with Ja Morant as a baseline cutter, as a transition runner, and relocating around the three-point line as a shooter. They've taken a couple of guys that the Lakers front office saw no value in Scottie Pippen Jr. and Jay Huff, and they've turned them into useful rotation players. Both have looked flat out good at different parts this year. Jaren Jackson's off to a great start this year. He's averaging 20 points per game on 65% true shooting. So depth has helped carry them. But the story of their success to this point in the season has been Ja Morant's playmaking. And I wanted to take a second to put a light on that. He's 3rd in the league in assists per game behind Trae Young and James Harden. The way he's getting his assists reminds me a lot of prime Russell Westbrook, like way back, like 2016, 2017, 2018, where it's like he starts to mix with the ball and all eyes are on him. And there's a lot of guys sneaking along the baseline. He's hitting cutters along the baseline a lot. He's hitting corner 3-point shooters a lot. So he's kind of like gearing everybody towards him and finding those openings on the back line. But he's also doing some super advanced stuff in ball screens. Talked about this the other day, but he's doing a really good job using his eyes to manipulate the low man, which is the guy who's guarding the shooter in the weak side corner who typically comes over to help on the roll, right? And he's doing a good job of manipulating that guy and finding openings to either skip the pass to that shooter or to hit the roll man, but he's making that read based on the how he can manipulate the defense with his eyes. Ja's off to a great start. I'm not sure how much more injury luck, the injury bad luck, I should say, that the Grizzlies can handle, but the Grizzlies are off to a good start. Number 8, the New York Knicks. After the catastrophe on opening night against Boston, they've won 3 out of 4. Had a decent second half lead against Cleveland in the game they lost, but they had a pretty bad stretch. And shout out to the Cleveland Cavaliers, are playing good basketball. They played really well in the late third, early fourth. They ended up taking that game from them. But they had a blowout win against the Pacers. That was impressive. A blowout win against the Pistons. That was impressive. They had a big second half comeback against the Miami Heat in Miami, where Karl Anthony Towns went bonkers, was doing a ton of work in the post, was just cooking Nikola Jovic, and then did some damage one-on-one to Bam in crunch time. They were spamming pick and pop, where Cat just kept catching at the top of the key and either shooting a three or driving the closeout. Did a lot of damage there. His best game of the season. Their metrics so far, they're 3rd in offense, 16th in defense, but a 106 defensive rating if you take out the Boston game. Now, you can't take out the Boston game. It's part of the deal, but the point is they've defended well since that Boston game. They're 5th in net rating and 8th in rebounding, although they are not the offensive rebounding force that they were last year. It's a different type of team. Mikal Bridges, all the concern about his shooting, it's been okay. He's been 42% from 3 since the Boston game, averaging 18 points a game. So even if it doesn't necessarily look the way that we want it to, his jumper's going in. And overall, I just like the new dimension that Karl Anthony Towns brings to the offense. The pick and pop is a real weapon that they can go to at the end of these games. And again, I like when they use it almost as a means with which to set up drive and kick, where it's like, even though guys are going to close out to Cat, like let him beat that guy off the dribble, just attacking the closeout, and then play drive and kick from there. You've got all of this talent. Really, really like the dimension and the variety that we're seeing in that New York Knicks offense. Number 7, the Dallas Mavericks. Relative to their expectations coming out of an NBA Finals appearance, it's a little bit of an up and down start for them, but Luka Doncic has been hurt. And so he hasn't really looked like the Luka that we expect him to be in the long run. They've taken care of business when they're supposed to, like they beat Orlando without Paolo, a nice wire-to-wire victory last night. They beat San Antonio, they beat Utah, but they're 1-2 against some of the higher teams that they've played against. So they lost to Phoenix in Phoenix. They beat Minnesota in Minnesota, classic way that they always dominate Minnesota. But they had a really ugly performance at home against the Houston Rockets, where they never took a lead and trailed by as many as 23 in the second half. Didn't move the ball well in that game, and that's going to be kind of one of the things that we talk about over the course of the season is they clearly, through what I've seen on film, implemented a lot more variety in their offense, but they still have a tendency sometimes to start spamming stuff and like really, really get into some like old-fashioned lack of ball and player movement type of offense. And again, it's really early and they're still figuring some shit out and it'll take some time, but they didn't move the ball well in that Houston game. They only generated 8 wide open threes, which again, that's their bread and butter, is like getting the ball moving, getting all their skill involved, generating high quality catch and shoot situations. But still, again, it's a lot of new players. It's a lot of new stuff that they're running. And Luka's not in peak shape right now. So like, give it some time. They'll be fine. And all of that, they're 4-2. They're 4-2, and most excitingly, they're 3rd in defense right now. They do a really good job of protecting the rim, but they also chase teams off the three-point line. It's an analytically smart approach to defense. It's keeping them in a very, very good defensive foundation that's going to help them win a lot of games. 17th in offense. That's going to improve in time. The only real red flag right now is they're 23rd in rebounding, but I think that'll stabilize over the course of the season. And again, the defense stuff is super encouraging, and Luka's going to continue to get better in time. And new system, new players always give it time to get their footing. Wait till that offense gets cooking. When that offense gets cooking, they're going to start racking up some wins, and they're already 4-2. Number 6, the Los Angeles Lakers played the toughest schedule in the NBA to start the season. Their opponent win percentage so far is 67%, but they've done pretty well. They're 4-2 out the gates. They beat 3 straight teams to start the season that are all in the Western Conference playoff mix. They beat the Minnesota Timberwolves, kind of controlled that game from start to finish. Really impressive come from behind win against the Phoenix Suns, and then another impressive win against the Kings, where they kind of fell behind in a third quarter run where their athleticism started to rise to the surface as an issue, and then LeBron pulled that game out. But then they lost a tough crunch time game in Phoenix, and then they laid an absolute egg in Cleveland. It just ran off the floor, and that one was not pretty at all. They did right the ship in Toronto, but there were some athleticism issues that kind of started to rise to the surface in that game as well. And so more or less, the Lakers are kind of exactly what I thought they would be to this point. Like, I think they're a good team. That's a good offense, which is what they have been. Their starting lineup is awesome. There's 75 minutes of Austin, D'Lo, Rui, LeBron, AD. They're plus 10 net rating in those 75 minutes. Again, against the toughest schedule in the league. They've been good on both ends of the floor. That lineup is crushing people in the glass. They're grabbing 57% of available rebounds. But as we've seen, when their starting lineup is so big and so skilled that they can kind of make up for their perimeter athleticism weaknesses. But as soon as they start to mingle the bench group with the starting lineup, they get smaller. And when they get smaller and less skilled, then all of a sudden their perimeter athleticism issues rise to the surface. You guys have seen it. And again, we talked about ball pressure and how it's valuable, but this team doesn't handle it well. Like, look at the Minnesota game. Dante DiVincenzo and Gilgeous-Alexander Walker, two super athletic guards. They start picking up full court and causing problems for the Lakers guards. The offense bogs down for a little bit. The Kings game, late third quarter. Again, it's always like right when that starting lineup comes out in that late part of the third quarter when they're a little bit more tired. They've been playing for a while. The lineups are smaller, less skilled. That's when the athleticism comes to the surface as an issue. The Kings cause problems for them there. Even that Raptors game, like, they're young and they're athletic, and they started playing really hard because they're down and they're trying to work their way back into the game, and the Lakers just kind of struggle in those environments. So again, like, they're fine. They're a good team. They're going to win lots of games. They're going to be, as long as LeBron and AD stay relatively healthy, I think they'll be above the play-in. That's all good. But this perimeter athleticism issue is a real problem that they're going to have to address this year. There's two main ways that it's showing up. One, transition defense. This is one stat for you guys to drive home just how bad the Lakers' transition defense has been. The Lakers are 11th in half-court defensive rating. So according to Cleaning the Glass, they've been the 11th best half-court defense. But in overall defensive rating for all possessions, regardless of where they take place, the Lakers are 27th in defensive rating. So they are the fourth worst defense in the NBA, despite being the 11th best half-court defense. And it's because they're getting absolutely shredded in transition. LeBron and AD are not running the floor well enough to start the year. That is a huge problem. And then two, they do not have athletes in the backcourt that can make up for the fact that they're constantly in these disadvantaged situations with their guards back in transition. It's a real problem. It's going to take better commitment from LeBron and AD, and it's going to take an upgrade in perimeter athleticism. The second place where you're seeing that issue pop is where other teams leverage their athleticism, which is what I talked about earlier. What the Kings did, what the Wolves did, what the Toronto Raptors did in the second half of their game. Like, when teams really start to leverage their athleticism is when the Lakers start to have those issues. So they're off to a good start. The 4-2. Again, 4-2 with the toughest schedule in the league. You got to take that 10 times out of 10 if you're a Laker fan. But there definitely are some issues that they're going to have to address in the long run. They're also getting to an easier part of their schedule. They're at Detroit tonight, at Memphis, Philly, Toronto, Memphis at home, then at San Antonio, at New Orleans, and then home for Utah. And then they have Orlando without Paolo most likely. So, like, then things get tougher again. So, like, I think there's a good chance they go 7-2 in that stretch. I think that they'll drop one of the Memphis games. They'll probably lose in Memphis, and they'll probably beat Memphis at home. And then I don't know if it'll be the game at New Orleans, although the Lakers have always had their number. Well, the game at New Orleans or one of these other teams that's younger and athletic might just get them on a game when they're being lazy. But I think they probably go 7-2 in that stretch, and so we could be looking at an 11-4 Lakers team in 2 weeks, which would unquestionably be a very good start for that team. The Emirates NBA Cup is here, and you can win big getting in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All 30 teams split into 6 groups every Tuesday and Friday, playing for the right to advance in the single elimination in-season tourney, culminating in the NBA Cup Championship in Vegas. Right now, the Boston Celtics are favored to win the NBA Cup at plus 370. The Oklahoma City Thunder have the second best odds at plus 600, and then the New York Knicks have the third best odds at plus 900. First time, here's something special just for you. New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Score big with DraftKings Sportsbook. Every point counts. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code HOOPS. That's HOOPS. That's code HOOPS for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Number 5, the Golden State Warriors. Easily the biggest surprise out in the Western Conference. There's 2 big surprises this year. The Cleveland Cavaliers at the top of the East and the Golden State Warriors. Again, if you look at the tail end of last year, They were bad against teams that were 500 or better. Steph didn't look like a top 10 player anymore at the tail end of last year. They, again, huge high leverage games, like got to beat the Pelicans at home, and then they lose. Or like, here we are, we're in Sacramento. We have a chance to get a playoff spot, and they get their butts kicked. Like, it looked bleak for the Warriors after last season. So bleak that you could argue that it wasn't even worth really investing in them in terms of a trade. They have completely flipped the script to start this year. Just a couple of key signings, much better buy-in. Training camp seems to have worked wonders for like setting roles for all these guys. They're super deep. They're super fast. This is a crazy stat for you. They have just 55 points scored by Steph Curry through 6 games, and they're 5-1. That's awesome. Now, they've played a very light schedule out of the gates. But when you factor in the fact that Steph is out, it's still pretty impressive. To beat the Pelicans twice without Steph and without Wiggins and without DeAnthony Melton, that's impressive. To beat the Rockets without Steph, without DeAnthony Melton, that's super impressive. And that was a fun game too. Like, the Rockets are a good team. They jumped them early, but the Rockets are a good team. They battled back. They got back in the game with ball pressure. And it was really cool to see the way different Warriors stepped up at different parts in the game. In crunch time and regulation, Buddy Hield and Brandon Podziemski made created shots in one-on-one situations against good defenders and scored. You know, like really high-level shot creation from them. And then in overtime, Jonathan Kuminga had like just 3 jaw-dropping plays. He had a left shoulder fadeaway that was like a tough, like Kobe-style fadeaway that he hit. He had like 2 ridiculously athletic drives to the basket where he got buckets, of one in transition where he was like shot out of a cannon. It was unbelievable. They ended up getting a big win. But the story of this team is depth. They don't have a single player aside from Steph Curry that anyone would rank among the top 50 players in the NBA, but they have 13 players that are all good NBA rotation players. And specifically, as an athletic trait, they have an incredible amount of speed on the perimeter. Andrew Wiggins is fast. Jonathan Kuminga is fast. Moses Moody is fast. Brandon Podziemski is fast. As bigs, Trace Jackson Davis is fast. Draymond Green is fast. Lindy Waters is fast. Gary Payton is fast. They have a lot of fast guys. They have a lot of speed. And then the other thing too is many of those guys can run action. They have like DeAnthony Melton, who I didn't mention, he's fast as well. He can run action. Brandon Podziemski can run action. Lindy Waters can come off of a screen and hit a shot. Moses Moody can come off of a screen and hit a shot. Like, these guys they all can shoot on the move, dribble over these actions and make reads. They just are really, really talented on the back end of their roster. It makes them very deep and gives them a very, very high floor. This has allowed Steve Kerr to do what he does best, which is apply structure to a situation. They're running a super structured offense, especially with Steph out of the lineup. And then on the defensive end of the floor, they're playing Steve's preferred style. Remember, Steve wants to switch, contain, play passing lanes. That's like Steve Kerr's bread and butter on the defensive end of the floor. And because they have so much defensive talent, they can keep waves and waves of that style regardless of which lineup is on the floor. And that's allowing them to force a ton of turnovers, and that's allowing them to do a ton of damage with their speed in transition off of it. I talked about this a lot with the Cavs. But again, switching, containing, playing passing lanes, that is a great way to force turnovers in the NBA. This team has an incredibly high floor, and I think they're going to win a lot of regular season games. They are heading into a tougher part of their schedule, though. After the Washington game tonight, they go on the road to Boston, on the road to Cleveland, on the road to Oklahoma City, and then home for Dallas. So I think at that point, Warriors fans will see a little bit more of my point as it pertains to like their offensive ceiling and the fact that they'll need to add more firepower to contend with the top of the league. But it's hard not to be excited about their start. They're 4th in offense, 2nd in defense, 10th in rebounding, and our number 1 net rating team through this Monday, November 4th. I should say through Sunday because it's not counting Monday's games. Number 4, the Phoenix Suns, another team that had a brutal schedule to start the year. They've had the 3rd toughest schedule in the league to start, yet they're 5-1. 16th in offense, 6th in defense, 8th in net rating, 17th in rebounding. By far the most exciting stats coming from Phoenix in this early part of the season. I've got 2 of them for you. 1, 71% assist percentage. Number 1 in the entire NBA. That means 71% of their made field goals are assisted. Last year, they were 14th in the NBA at just 63%. So they've dramatically improved how many of their baskets are coming out of actually moving the basketball around. Again, like, this is something I've talked about a lot. If they're a pull-up jump shooting team, they have a certain ceiling on them. I'm not saying they shouldn't take pull-up jump shots, but if they rely on that too much, it puts a certain ceiling on them. If they become a drive and kick team like Boston and they generate high-quality three-point attempts off the catch, that's where their true offensive ceiling is. And like that, to me, that 71% indicator or assist percentage is a really strong indicator that they're playing the right style. They're also the second big stat that's positive coming out of Phoenix. Last year, they were 19th in three-pointers made per 100 possessions. This year, they're 6th, generating a lot more high-quality three-point attempts off of that drive and kick ball. Now, here's the thing. Statistically, the offense hasn't even really taken off yet. But it's a strong indicator that it will, because they're moving the ball and they're generating threes. And when it does, I think they'll be able to reach a higher ceiling than they were in years past. I'm seeing some of the most beautiful drive and kick possessions in the modern NBA coming out of this Phoenix Suns offense because of how talented their perimeter players are. And I'm really, really excited to see where they can get to by the end of this year. I'm not as high on the Tyus Jones fit as everyone else. I've kind of elaborated on that in the show. I won't get too far into it today, but the gist of it is I think navigating ball pressure or bringing the ball up the floor is a pretty small issue in the grand scheme of what had caused the Suns' issues last year. I thought it mostly came down to athleticism and strength and physicality and handling rock fights, right? That's why I'm so stoked about the Ryan Dunn pick. Hitting on the Ryan Dunn pick has helped them hit an athletic level that they didn't have previously. And like I don't think people really understand what he's doing offensively yet. Like he's actually scoring at volume in his minutes. He's hitting 39% of his threes, but he's doing it at a rate of 9 attempts per 36 minutes. That's like high usage player type of stuff that you're seeing at. That's like I'm a knockdown, aggressive green light shooter type of aggressive shooting that we're seeing out of Ryan Dunn, and he's making them. In 45 minutes of Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, and Ryan Dunn sharing the floor together, they have a 117 offensive rating and a 100 defensive rating. That's plus 17 per 100 possessions. Mike Budenholzer is a better offensive coach than Frank Vogel. He has stabilized them on that end of the floor, and they've actually defended in a very analytically sound way. Again, they're chasing teams off the three-point line. They're never going to be an elite paint defense because they don't really have a legitimate rim protector, but they're doing a decent job there, and they're guarding the three-point line well. They're forcing teams into mid-range jump shots. They're forcing over 10 opponent mid-range attempts per game. That's top 5 in the NBA right now. They just look like a sharper, better version of last year's team. Number 3, the Oklahoma City Thunder. They're 6-0 out of the gates, although they've played a somewhat light schedule, but they're undefeated, and there's an ass kicking in the Nuggets in there, so I don't want to make too light of it. But a lot of the same trends from last year. They're forcing a lot of turnovers. They're playing in transition a lot. 2 major changes I'm noticing. Chet is playing at an insanely high level and is getting more usage. His usage rate is up. He's blocking well over 3 shots per game. He's having an incredible defensive start to the season. And again, like when you he's increased his scoring volume and usage with a dip or without a dip, in his efficiency. Like that's tough to do, especially for a young player. To do more while also maintaining your efficiency is like the challenge of a young player developing, and he's doing that well. And then both Jalen Williams and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander are working extensively to change their shot profile. They're both taking about double the pull-up three-point shots that they took last year, and Shai in particular struggling a little bit with it. They're investing time and repetition in getting those guys to the point where they're more comfortable shooting from 3 off the dribble, just trying to increase their efficiency, which I admire. And playing against this light schedule, this is the time to do it. But they are heading into a tougher stretch of their schedule now. They have Orlando tonight, although that'd be a tougher matchup if Paolo is actually healthy. But after that, they go to Denver, then home for Houston and home for Golden State. And then they have a couple of easier games, and then they go they play Phoenix and Dallas later the following week at home. So we're going to get to see them play some tougher teams and see how they stack up at that point in time. Number 2, the Boston Celtics. They dropped a game in Indy where they somehow looked more impressive. They raced a 21-point fourth quarter lead to send that game to overtime. Jayson Tatum hit a ridiculous step back 3 at the top that sent that game to overtime. But then Pascal Siakam ends up hitting a couple more shots than the Celtics do in OT, and the Pacers end up getting that win. But they're 6-1, first in offense again, 13th in defense, which we'll talk about in a minute. They're 4th in net rating and 14th in rebounding, which again, we'll talk about in a minute. So with the defense and rebounding stuff, they're also struggling to protect the paint a little bit. Like they're 19th in opponent paint points allowed. But some of this is to be expected. Like they're holding Al Horford's minutes relatively low so that they don't wear him out in the early part of the season. That means there's a lot of Cornette. There's a lot of Neemias Queta out there. Like they're playing their end of the bench guys that, like I shouldn't say end of the bench guys, but they're playing back into the rotation guys that would not be in their playoff rotation if they're healthy. And so Some of these rebounding and defense woes are somewhat to be expected. Their transition defense has also been pretty bad, which usually Boston's transition defense is really good. So I think part of that is a lot of these games have been blowouts. So these games are loose a lot of the time. But again, let's just put it this way. I'm 0% worried about Boston's defense. When I watch them, anytime they want to tighten the screws, I feel like they can. And in clutch situations, although they've only been in 2 of them this year, they have an 86 defensive rating, which is excellent. So I have no doubt that Boston's going to be able to get the stops that they need when they need to get them. Jaylen Brown is slumping a little bit, but I'm not worried about it. The biggest thing I'm watching is Tatum and his shooting. If Tatum goes up a level, then I think this Boston team becomes unbeatable. They're already a favorite with Tatum kind of status quo. But if Jayson Tatum can go up a level and just reach that next level of reliable 3-level scoring, if he can get to that point, that's where I think this team becomes legitimately unbeatable. He started the season super well, but now we're 7 games in, and Jayson Tatum's getting 1.03 points per jump shot, and he's shooting 36% overall, which is actually a tiny bit down from where he was last year in the regular season. He was at 1.04 points per jump shot. And that was with him lighting the world on fire against the Knicks in the first game. So, I'm just curious to see where that stabilizes. My guess is it'll stabilize slightly above where it was last year, because I do think he's a better shooter than he was last year, but we'll see in the larger sample. And if it ends up well above where it was last year, that's when we all need to, start being really scared that this could end ugly for everybody as Boston runs away with it again. One last Celtic I wanted to shout out, Peyton Pritchard. I think he's arguably been their 4th best player this year. He's scoring at real volume and efficiency, and he's become one of the best dirty work guys in the league. He's changing games by coming in and really picking up the ball and applying a ton of ball pressure, which, as we've talked about, is super valuable. He seems to win every 50-50 ball. He rebounds well for a small guard. He just looks better. And that's yet another talent boost for an already stacked Boston roster. But number 1, the surprise of the season, the Cleveland Cavaliers, league best 7-0. Some really impressive wins. They beat the Knicks in Madison Square Garden. They blew out that Lakers team, which I think is a good team. They went into Milwaukee and won despite Damian Lillard going off for 40+. They're kicking ass. Their metrics right now, they're 2nd in offense, 5th in defense, 3rd in net rating. 3 main things that I've seen them change under Kenny Atkinson. 1, they're doing more switching in containing and staying home off the ball, which is allowing them to force turnovers. Remember, Kenny Atkinson came from working with the Golden State Warriors for the last several seasons, so he's bringing over some of that Steve Kerr style of defense. Switching and forcing more turnovers. Basic stats for you guys. They were 13th in opponent turnover rate last year. This year, they're 4th. They were 11th last year in scoring off of turnovers. This year, they're number 1 in the NBA in scoring off of turnovers, which leads to our next biggest change. They're playing much, much faster. As we talked about, they're scoring off of turnovers, but they're also 5th in transition points scored per game. Last year, they were 17th, so that's a substantial improvement. They're just actually playing to the strengths of this roster. Garland's fast. Mitchell's fast. Whether it's Strus or Dean Wade or whoever it is they play at the 3, they have a speed there. Mobley is one of the most mobile bigs in the league. Jared Allen is a very mobile big. They should be running, and they are running now. So shout out to Kenny Atkinson. He's maximizing what this roster is bringing to the table. They're staying out of the half court whenever they can, and they're making life easier on their stars as a result. The 3rd biggest change is a lot more Evan Mobley on the ball. His usage rate is up about 4%. He's averaging 18 points per game on 62% true shooting, running a lot of inverted action. There's stretches of the game where Donovan Mitchell's out, and they're just playing him with Sam Merrill and just having Merrill they run a horn set where Merrill will set a screen for Mobley at the left elbow, and he'll come off and Merrill will pop, and they'll just play drive and kick basketball out of that. They're getting a lot of really good stuff out of it. In all of this, the transition scoring, the improvement of Evan Mobley and his usage, that's making it so that Donovan Mitchell can pick his spots more. So as a result, his minutes are lower because they're beating people by more. His efficiency is up because he can pick his spots more. Yeah, his scoring volume is down a little bit, but who cares? You're winning. It's all just making life easier for Donovan Mitchell and the Cavs. This is just a really damn good basketball team, and they've got a favorable schedule coming up. I think they're going to beat the Bucks tonight at home. They go to New Orleans, then they're home for Golden State and Brooklyn, to Chicago, Philly, back for Chicago, Charlotte, to Boston, back for the Pelicans, the Raptors, and the Hawks, then to Atlanta. I think they got a chance to go 9-3 in that stretch. So we could be looking at a 16-3 Cavs team by the end of November, which is really exciting stuff if you're a Cleveland Cavaliers fan. All right, let's get into our mailbag real quick before we get out of here. So first question, this was in relation to a thread of defensive Milwaukee Bucks clips that I put together. They had a really ugly defensive fourth quarter against the Cavs the other night. This first question. It's impossible to win games with Bobby Portis and Pat Connaughton playing meaningful minutes on your roster in 2024. Giannis and Dame combined with 75 points and 18 assists to 1 turnover and lost. So here's the thing. It's ugly. I put a whole thread of these clips together. Go to my Twitter feed at _JasonLT. You can see the thread that I'm talking about. But yeah, Bobby Portis is bad. He was matched up with Georges Niang in that early stretch of the fourth quarter. He was overhelping. He was losing him off the ball. It was ugly, right? But it's not just Bobby. Like, a lot of good defenders are making mistakes in the system. Like, Giannis is out of position a lot. Brook Lopez had a big crunch time overhelp where he stepped over and left Jared Allen wide open for like a little bank shot when he shouldn't have been helping. DeLon Wright, who's a career good defender at the guard position, botched a switch and gave up a layup. Like, they're just not sharp as a team. And that screams coaching to me. It screams to me that, like, from day one of training camp, there's not a lot of accountability and there's not a lot of attention to detail, because that sort of thing becomes contagious and it leads to good habits and it trickles down. Guys, like, there are a lot of teams out there, like the Lakers defense is 27th in the league, but they're 11th in half court defense, even though they have a ton of bad defenders, because they're at least like trying hard. They're locked in, right? Denver put together a championship level defense with Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic. Like, coaching is a huge part of constructing a viable defense. You've got to take your talented defensive players and you've got to direct them into like large things that make life easier so you can construct these small, achievable defensive roles for the players around them. Again, it's going to be difficult. I'm not expecting you to turn Bobby Portis into a lockdown defensive player, but like, Doc Rivers has this team legitimately bad in so many different ways on the defensive end of the floor right now that this was a stat I checked like 2 days ago, but they're giving up the highest efficiency to pick and roll ball handlers in the entire league right now. Like, you went and got Gary Trent Jr. and DeLon Wright to try to improve things at the point of attack, and somehow you got worse. Like, I think a lot of this ends up coming back to Doc Rivers, and I think he's got to do a better job coaching these guys up on a possession-by-possession basis, because right now they're just not sharp. They don't look like a serious basketball team, and I think that extends beyond personnel, even though we can all agree that there are some major personnel weaknesses on this team. What are some legitimate moves you can see the Nuggets making to strengthen their bench? They are the main reason I don't see them making it out of the conference, but it feels like they don't have enough trading power to fix it. So for me, like, I actually think Denver kind of falls into that category where it's less about finding like super high-end players and it's more about finding functional role players, because they're a team that's going to stagger their bench, right? Like, this is a team that everything in terms of their talent equity is invested in their starting lineup, right? Like, that's the core of this team. And most of their issues come down to the starters not playing well enough, right? Like, Jamal Murray is not playing like Jamal Murray yet. Michael Porter Jr. is not playing like Michael Porter Jr. yet. I think they will in time, okay? Then you stagger them with those bench groups, right? And so Jamal is going to be the guy who's determining a lot of those possessions when Jokic is off the floor. Michael Porter Jr. is going to be determining a lot of those possessions. What you need are useful role players that have some veteran experience and that just know how to play alongside other good basketball players. That could be like a Cam Johnson from Brooklyn or a Dorian Finney-Smith. Like, just a useful role player that comes in that knows how to play NBA basketball at a high level. Like, there's got to be an option there for Malone to go to in the event that these young guys don't pan out. It's when you're playing with these young guys where it's like, it's just such a cluster F every single game, because you don't know what you're going to get, that it becomes very difficult to build consistency there. But eventually the Nugget starters will play better. Eventually they'll be able to piece together, at least, again, with the Nuggets bench, it's not about being positive. It's about not completely combusting every single time Nikola Jokic steps off the floor. All these previous years when the Nuggets won the championship even, they typically lose the non-Jokic minutes by about 11 points per 100 possessions. This year, they're getting absolutely shredded when Jokic is off the floor. They've got to find a way to even that out a little bit. Had a lot of questions about from Warriors fans regarding this is the never-ending debate we have about whether or not the Warriors should make a trade at some point this season. It's like the most common mailbag question I get right now. I'll read a couple of them and I'll just kind of give some thoughts and then we'll move on. The first one, Dubs need to stand pat. They just learned a lot from the Houston game. It's about the defensive end. which understack will improve. Houston attempted to emulate the Clippers. Kerr made some mistakes with regard to the fourth quarter lineup. Should have won there. And in the future, there will be less success with what Houston did and what the Clippers are. The D will get better, and then their offense is sufficient. A different mailbag question. All these analysts spend their offseason disrespecting the Warriors, saying that they won't make it to the playoffs, but now they see the Warriors are actually clicking, even winning games without Steph. All of a sudden, the talk has shifted to the Warriors need to make a trade for them to compete. Spare the Warriors, please. Admit you were wrong and analyze the game instead of pestering us with the trade talks. 2022 is a case study, but you never learn. So, guys, here's the thing. I try not to be too results based, right? Like, for instance, I'm a Lakers fan. You guys know that. I don't hide from that on this show. I'm a Lakers fan, and the Lakers have played the toughest schedule in the league, and they're 4-2. There's a lot of reason to be excited if you're a Lakers fan. There are a lot of Lakers fans that are starting to talk reckless a little bit, right? I have, through it all, looked at the games and been like, okay, yeah, there are wins here. Like, there's a win against Minnesota. But in the win against Minnesota, there was a long stretch in the second half where Dante DiVincenzo and Nickeil Alexander-Walker started really ball pressuring, and the Laker offense kind of fell apart because the guards aren't very athletic. And then it happened again in the Kings game, and then it happened again in the Raptors game. And so I'm looking at it and I'm going, okay, yeah, 4-2, good. This is great. For the standings, it's great. Great start for the standings. They're heading into an easier stretch of their schedule now. I think the Lakers have a chance to be 11-4 after 15 games. Like, that would be, you got to be thrilled if you're a Lakers fan about that. But I also know that if you're going to get out of the Western Conference, you got to beat in Oklahoma City. You got to beat a couple of these teams from that other tier, like Memphis and Denver and Minnesota and Dallas and all these different teams, right? Like, it's just tough. And then should you get out of the conference, Boston's probably going to be waiting for you on the other side. And so I look at it and I go like, yeah, this is a good start for the Lakers, but I don't think they're athletic enough in the backcourt to really cause problems at the highest level of the game. I have to look beyond what their results have been to this point and look into the depth behind the results. That's kind of how I feel about the Warriors. The Warriors have 5 wins. That's great. 5-1 with Steph Curry playing 3 games, scoring 55 total points this season, and you're 5-1. That is a huge cause for celebration. But let's take a closer look. 3 of those wins are against teams that completely missed the play-in picture last year, and 2 were against the Pelicans, who were the 8th seed in the West last year, and they just traded 2 of their good role players for DeJounte Murray, who is now hurt. So, and they don't know what to do with the center position right now. They're kind of a mess. The Pelicans are kind of a mess. They just lost to Atlanta at home, and they lost to the Blazers earlier this year. So, look, it's still all very exciting. Last year, they had Steph out of the lineup for 8 games. They went 3-5. You've won the same amount of games without Steph already this year as you did the entire season last year. That is super exciting. They're clearly demonstrating that they have a much higher floor than they did last year. I would even go as far as to say that this team is cooking up something kind of special. Everyone seems to be buying into their roles, which was not the case last year. Jonathan Kuminga, it seems to be taking well to his bench role. He's been playing better since he went to the bench. The basketball character of this team is through the roof. They're resilient, they're selfless, they're hardworking, they're coachable. It's all coming together. These are the ingredients of a special basketball team. Even further, and I talked about this early in the show, you could argue last year, after they had a rough end to the season, again, they went 22-31 against teams that were 500 or better last year. Steph didn't look like a top 10 player over the final third of the season. And then at the end of the season, they had 2 really big games that they had to win. At home against the Pelicans, they lost. On the road in Sacramento with a chance to go to the second play-in game, they got their butts kicked. Coming out of last season, there was a lot of people arguing this team's not worth making a trade for. This team, the core isn't good enough to justify really investing in. Now it's hell yeah, they're worth investing in. They've completely turned it around. Now they seem close. They didn't seem close last year. Now they seem close. That makes it worth the aggression. It's altogether a positive trend. It's a reason to be excited. I'm now just looking at it beyond that. Okay, now we have an exciting team. We have a 5-1 team. We have a real team here. Let's take a look at the roster. Let's take a look at what their strengths and weaknesses are. Let's be honest. Okay, against the best defenses in the league, Steph is the only guy I trust on this team to create his own shot. Against the best defenses in the league. Against the highest levels, like I was talking about earlier with the Lakers. That's what I'm focusing on here. The best indicator of future performance is past performance. People were kind of down on the Warriors because in the past they didn't look as good. So that's what, like, I always think it's funny when people get upset about media underrating or overrating their teams. All of us are just trying to make predictions. And last year, it didn't look like this team was in there. This has been a surprise. This and the Cavs, these are the two biggest surprises of the season. Nobody was picking the Cavs to go 7-0. Did any of you Warriors fans pick the Cavs to go 7-0 this year? No, because you looked at them last year and you're like, they're middle of the pack Eastern Conference playoff team, right? This is an exciting trend. It is a reason to be excited. You guys have demonstrated that you were close in a way that did not seem to be the case last year. Last question. My man is so good he can predict the future. Kuminga is 22. The last time I checked, you had no idea Shai or Ant or Giannis would be at that level. Again, guys, let's just be honest. I really like Jonathan Kuminga. He's an exciting young player. The plays he made in overtime of the Houston game, they're freakishly talented type of plays. Giannis at 22 years old averaged 23 and 9 with 4 stocks per game, finished 7th in MVP voting, made the All-Star team, and was second team All-NBA. And averaged 25 and 10 in the playoffs. Anthony Edwards, his age 22 season was just last year. 7th in MVP voting, All-Star, second team All-NBA, averaged 28, 7 and 7 on 60% true shooting as a number one option for a Western Conference Finals team. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at 22, averaged 24 points per game on 51% from the field, 42% from 3, and 80% from the line. Guys, like, Kuminga's an exciting young player. He's not those guys. There is no foundational, transcendently great superstar among the young players in this Warriors group. That doesn't mean trade him for pennies, but if you have the opportunity to give this roster an opportunity to compete for a championship, I feel like you owe it. You owe it to Steph, you owe it to Draymond, you owe it to Steve Kerr. Now, because again, like if you do nothing, it's not like you fast forward 5 years and this is a championship team. There's no championship foundation there. You go look at NBA history. You don't win a championship unless you have a top 10 player. So again, like it's not about, and I'm not even necessarily saying you have to trade one of the young guys. You have depth. You have 13 rotation players. Hell, piece together 3 mediocre salaries that are not the young guys that you so desperately want to keep. You are uniquely equipped. Guys, like, I'm worried about the Lakers. The Lakers have like 7 rotation players that I trust, and that's if Vando's healthy. It's like Gabe and Vando are the only 2 that I trust. I don't trust Dalton Connect. He's a rookie. Max Christie's looked awful. Jackson Hayes fouls too much and is legitimately a bad defensive player. Vando and Gabe are the only 2 guys that I kind of trust in the Lakers rotation. So if the Lakers have to trade guys and they have to give up 2 rotation pieces to get somebody back, I'm worried that they won't be deep enough anymore. You guys, the Warriors have like 7 different configurations of trades they could make that send out 2 or 3 players to bring back somebody high-powered where they still are deep, where they still are talented, where they still have everything they need to contend. You're in a great spot. Stop. It's not about talking about how you don't have enough just for the sake of being negative. It's just the realistic kind of nature of looking at what the NBA landscape is. Last question. Jayson, I love you and your content, but man, it is too soon to know which team is and isn't a contender. Guys, it's my job to have an opinion on the season. It would be boring if I came out here every single day and was like, yeah, none of this matters. Talk to me in April. None of this matters. Talk to me in April. At the end of the day, this is content. And my job is to have an opinion. So yeah, like you're right. Everything here has a footnote. It's early, but I add that in here. But like my job is to have an opinion, to have a take. I'm going to come out with power rankings. I'm going to come out with contender rankings. I'm going to come out with player rankings, even though technically we don't really know what any of this shit looks like until we get further into the season. But that's just kind of the nature of how this goes. All right, guys, that's all I have for today. As always, I sincerely appreciate you for supporting the show. We will be back tomorrow for some game reaction and an episode of Timpf's Tape. I will see you guys then.